This is a violation of international norms that guarantee freedom of the press, and it is unacceptable under any circumstances.
That's right. That was Secretary of State Hillary Clinton speaking out yesterday after we saw the pictures and heard the reports of journalists being chased, harassed, punched, clubbed, some hospitalized, just simply terrorized. Some have ended up locked away and others in the hospital still. This morning, Al Jazeera said that, quote, thugs raided their offices in Cairo, destroying their equipment. So a clear effort to silence the media and keep this story of the Egyptian uprising from leaving its borders. We're going to be speaking right now with Mona Eltahawy. She was born in Egypt and is a columnist and reporter who was based in Cairo. Now, we've been looking, and welcome, Mona. Thanks so much for getting up with us this morning. We were looking at the pictures of the demonstrations today. The largest crowd by the estimates of our reporters that we've seen, yet peaceful. What has changed overnight?
Absolutely. What has changed is that the Mubarak regime realized that the entire world was watching as his thugs were unleashed on peaceful pro-democracy supporters. The uprising has been peaceful so far, and the only times that we've seen violence is when Mubarak people moved in. And as you mentioned, the Al Jazeera office was ransacked by Mubarak thugs. Human rights activists I know have been arrested, bloggers I know have been arrested, and members of the youth movements that were instrumental in launching this uprising have been arrested, which tells me that the Mubarak regime is trying, giving it its best effort to silence this uprising, because it knows that Egyptians in their millions are turning out and saying, enough of Mubarak, we want freedom.
Well, in some ways it seems to have backfired, because these journalists were all telling their harrowing stories, from our own Anderson Cooper 2 different times to many of the other stories in news organizations around the world. And today we see a very different scene. Is it safe to assume that the Mubarak regime has realized that this didn't work and it is going to be a safer place for journalists, or is that too early of an assumption to make?
You know, it's absolutely astounding to think in this day and age that any regime can think that it can beat journalists and the word is not going to get out. So it's kind of an indication of the parallel universe that the Mubarak regime exists in. I mean, it also shut down the internet for several days until they allowed it to work again a couple of days ago. So I think they're realizing that their concerted efforts to just shut down this mass uprising, the efforts are not working. And what we need to see, though, is more pressure from the international community. The Germans came out today and said that they would not sell any more weapons to Egypt, and I think the U.S. administration and other allies of the Mubarak regime should take this as an indication of what they can do to stop the violence against peaceful protesters. Because today is a fantastic day. I mean, as an Egyptian watching thousands upon thousands of my people rallying peacefully for democracy, I mean, I'm ecstatic. So I think that, you know, the world is watching, and Mubarak needs to know he cannot crack down like this.
So what's the next step? We heard from Vice President Suleiman. He spoke with ABC's Christiane Amanpour and said, we are going to let them be in the streets. We're going to let them protest. We wish they wouldn't, but we're not going to stop it. Is that a satisfactory enough position, and will these protesters accept him stepping in, at least temporarily, if indeed this handover happens?
Well, the #1 demand of the pro-democracy supporters in Tahrir Square, in Cairo and other parts of Egypt is that Hosni Mubarak step down. So until that happens, you will continue to see protests every day. I'm already seeing on Twitter that people have called next week Resistance Week, just in case Mubarak doesn't step down today. But, you know, there was an ominous tone to Omar Suleiman's interview with Christiane Amanpour yesterday, because he said, well, when she asked him, what if they don't go home? He said, you know, we will tell their parents to tell them to go home, completely missing the point that there are parents, children and grandchildren at Tahrir Square, and, you know, acting in this very paternalistic way that represents this dictatorship that people are fighting against. So we're still seeing this kind of parallel track. So I think that Egyptians will continue to demonstrate and demand democracy and freedom, and the Mubarak regime is struggling to catch up. Until Mubarak steps down, you will see people in their thousands out in the streets demanding his removal from office.
But just quickly, is Vice President Suleiman part of the Mubarak regime in the eyes of the people?
Vice President Suleiman is very much part of the Egyptian regime. He was head of intelligence. He's very much connected to torture inside Egypt and also as part of the rendition program for the U.S. administration, where terrorism suspects are taken to Egypt and tortured by the Egyptian regime. So he is not trusted as part of the regime. But what I'm hearing from opposition right now is, first they want Mubarak to go, and then they could consider negotiating with Omar Suleiman, and then eventually he goes and they form an interim government. Number one target is Mubarak for his removal, and then they will consider talking to Omar Suleiman. But they do not trust him either, because he's definitely part of the regime.
Well, Mona Eltahawy, it's great to get your take on this. I know that you're very close to this story. You're an Egyptian journalist yourself. Thanks so much for joining us this morning.
Thanks, Kieran.